The medical information included in this podcast is provided as an educational resource only. Please consult your healthcare provider before making any healthcare decisions.
If you tell them about the emotions you experience, this is an opportunity to have deeper conversations and for you to feel more supported in your decisions and for those decisions to feel more shared. And it is often our decisions that feel shared that are the ones we have the most confidence in.
The average person makes 35,000 decisions a day. And for those with a chronic illness, that number is even higher. And our decision-making capacity may be pushed past our threshold. Jennifer Siedman joins us to talk about decision fatigue. She is a mom to 3. Her son Ben was diagnosed with Sanfilippo syndrome in 1997 and passed away 10 years ago. Often in the rare disease space, you find the most dedicated and compassionate individuals. And that's because they have lived through heartache and personal adversity. And they use their experiences as a catalyst to help others facing with the same challenges. Jennifer serves as the Director of Community Engagement for Courageous Parents Network, the CPN, a nonprofit whose mission is to empower patients, parents, and others caring for children with serious medical conditions. She also serves as president of Ben's Dream, Sanfilippo Research Foundation, and has worked with researchers and patient advocacy groups worldwide to fund and advance gene therapies to the clinical trial stage. Her favorite quote, "We must always travel in hope." Jennifer, it's such a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thanks, Julia, for having me here today, especially to talk about this really important topic around decision-making and understanding what decisional fatigue is. I think decision-making actually gets studied, in the medical profession and in other places, right? We know business decision-making. So it gets studied a lot. But I think in the rare disease community, it's not often something that we talk about intentionally. I think we all worry about it, but we don't bring a conscious intent to talk about what does decision fatigue, what is it? I mean, I didn't even know that decision fatigue was a thing until I started working at Courageous Parents Network and understanding it and looking at the research. And yet I know as the mom to Ben, I was feeling it all the time.
Yeah, and I think you're right. When we hear the word decision fatigue, we kind of acknowledge, oh, wait, that's a thing. That is a label for what we're feeling. It's, some of the things that happen when that mental energy required to make decisions becomes so heavy. Can you tell us exactly what, in your words, what decision fatigue is?
Sure. So decision fatigue is the mental exhaustion. And I might add emotional exhaustion as well, but officially it's the mental exhaustion that results from the sheer number of decisions a person makes daily. And earlier, you talked about those 35,000 decisions we make every day. Some of them are, we don't think about it. They're mindless. We open the fridge, we pull out the milk instead of the orange juice. It's kind of a mindless decision. But we need to understand that our brains are still working hard to make that decision. And so it counts. Because I think what we do is we focus on the bigger ones. And of course we do, because those are the ones that we're feeling. But what happens with decision fatigue? It can make making decisions hard when you suffer from it. So I want to tell you about what the research reveals as 5 things that tend to increase decision fatigue. I think when we're in rare, we're always in the midst of a difficult life situation. You're faced with uncertainty. I think uncertainty and rare disease kind of unfortunately walk hand in hand. And this last one is maybe not one everybody can check, but you have perfectionist tendencies or you have developed perfectionist tendencies to cope with your uncertainty. So I think most of us are likely victims of decision fatigue. So let me tell you about some signs that you can look for in yourself that might clue you in to, are you suffering from decision fatigue? Not only all those circumstances that I just described. There are physical symptoms to decision fatigue, like brain fog or exhaustion or an unwillingness to sort of pick yourself up and get up and do anything. Um, Other signs of decision fatigue can be not sort of physical manifestations, but behavioral manifestations. This can be things like procrastination, avoidance, and for some people, increased impulsivity in their decision making or in their life. Um, and we have funny places where the world takes advantage of that impulsivity in decision making, like all that stuff that's right at the checkout stand in the
Right.
supermarket. So if you find yourself frequenting those, you might want to think about whether you have decision fatigue. But importantly, and this is the part I think we often don't discuss, there are emotional symptoms to having decision fatigue. Those are most likely the two things: a feeling of overwhelm, which many people in rare disease speak about either because of their caregiving or experience or themselves as the patient, and regret. And so I think that these emotional parts often get sort of sloughed aside, but they are the real actual barriers to a lot of our decision making. I want to tell you some wisdom that got passed along to me as I was caring for Ben. And this happened to be told to me by my palliative care doctor when we were trying to make a very big decision for Benjamin. We were trying to decide if he was going to undergo spinal fusion surgery. Um, and what she said to me really took me aback. She said, "Jennifer, we make decisions in two places. We make them in our heads and we make them in our hearts. And the real key, I think, to tackling decision fatigue is learning how to listen to both of those places. Because I think we often, and it depends on our personality, lean on more one place over the other. And
Right.
often we're required to lean on our heads because we have to know so much in rare disease. But understanding that you're making it in two places can help you not only tackle the emotional parts and burdens of decision fatigue, but they can also help you find the champions, the people who are going to support you when you're considering a decision. Because you'll look for the ones that are going to listen to your heart or the ones that are going to listen to your head, depending on what you need in that decision circumstance.
I was just going to ask you about that and just say, how do you, or how did you, try to identify? Did you write it down on paper? Did you just, take some quiet time to yourself? How did you really figure out which one is speaking to you?
Well, I will tell you that part of that conversation with my palliative care doctor, and this is why sometimes a very skilled communicating physician can be helpful, was to look at a past decision. And we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go forward. And really, she really forced me to think about in that past decision, which side was I leaning more on? And who did I need to support that? And so sometimes analyzing a past decision that you've made, even if it doesn't feel like a really big one, can give you insights into where you need to look for support for those decisions that feel very thorny.
So looking at, for example, your Fabry team, um, other ways of education to listen to your head, and then maybe seeking out, like that family member or someone in the same shoes that have maybe walked that same path to get some of those answers from, or to really understand what your heart's saying.
Yes, because I think the thing that we tend to avoid as human beings are the emotions that are attached to some of these big decisions. And we have to learn to intentionally, and that's a critical word, think about those emotions. And at CPN, we have a saying that we like to say, you have to name it to tame it.
Like that.
And so if you don't know what emotion you're attaching to that particular decision in the moment, you may not be able to go into that decision with as much confidence.
So sometimes when decisions feel too big or just way too heavy, it can feel easier to just push that away and pretend the decision doesn't exist at all. So what advice do you have for someone who has a tendency to use avoidance when it comes to making really hard decisions?
So this is going to be a multifaceted answer, but I think the thing I want to point out about avoidance is one avoidance begets the next avoidance. So sometimes, the gremlin that we might be carrying, in this case, a decision, actually gets worse when we start to engage in avoidance tendencies. They sort of gets bigger. It's, it snowballs into something else. And that in and of itself can be problematic. But I also thought it might be helpful, Julia, to acknowledge that there's something called anticipatory regret. It's a real thing. It's studied. And what that is the fear of making the wrong decision. And some people can experience anticipatory regret to such a level that it prevents them from making any decision. And so again, I go back to regret is an emotion, right? It's not a behavior. It's not a physical symptom. It's actually an emotion that we need to think about in order to tackle those avoidance behaviors. So one other thing, just to be practical, because everybody likes a little practical information, practical advice now and again. Look back at a decision you made. This is a really great way to understand your tendencies, your behavior tendencies. Really dissect it. Whether it was a decision you felt good about, or maybe do both. Take two decisions. Look at one that you came out and you felt really good about, and what was the process you went through. Then take one where maybe you didn't feel quite as good, or you were avoiding making, and look at the process that you went through. What did you do? I know when I'm avoiding decisions, I end up at TJ Maxx and buying a lot of things that I don't really need. Okay. Because I'm getting the emotional upswing of that purchase that's allowing me to glaze over the bad feelings that I'm sort of having in the background of avoiding this decision. So really look at your behaviors and dissect it. And then when you're doing that dissection, the critical piece is to look at the emotion that is attached to why you're doing some of those things. Am I feeling overwhelmed? Am I frightened at the prospect of regret? Am I worried about the implication on my family? What emotions are you assigning to that? Because understanding your emotion will then also help you figure out what your next steps are. And also help you look for the right people who can support you to make that decision and to stop the avoidance behaviors, right? Sharing your decision-making process with your team, whether that's your medical team, a family member, maybe it's just a trusted friend, can certainly help you avoid the behaviors. First of all, they can say to you, hey, Julia, I'm seeing that you're avoiding right now. What's going on? Is there really something deeper? So they're going to be sort of your champions in the process to help you curb it. But again, I go back to this. If you tell them about the emotions you experience, this is an opportunity to have deeper conversations and for you to feel more supported in your decisions and for those decisions to feel more shared. And it is often our decisions that feel shared that are the ones we have the most confidence in.
Yeah, and I think there's that feeling of sometimes maybe you don't. I think when you have a friend that's so close to you or a family member that they can call out that with you, that's so big. That's just so important because sometimes maybe you don't realize you are avoiding what you're so scared of, because you don't want to feel that fear, right? So when someone says that, it can make you reflect on that actual emotion, all the stuff that's going on underneath.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also importantly, when you expose your decision process to someone else, or maybe multiple people, because you might need a certain person at a certain time and a different type of person at another time.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing it allows you to do, and you need to get in, I think it's good to get in the habit to do this, is to applaud yourself when you make a decision. In when you're living the rare disease life and decisions are being made again and again and again, what we often forget to do, the part of the process that we move away from, is to congratulate ourselves when we make a decision.
Yeah.
To say to ourselves, hey, that was really hard. I went through this process. I came out with this decision. And that's really part of making sure that we don't suffer from decisional regret, right? We need to acknowledge when we're doing a good job. And then we need the people around us to be able to say, hey, maybe your husband would say this. Hey, Jennifer, I saw that you were having a hard time making that decision. You were avoiding it. I think it's really great that you did this to get around it, or you shared with me. Let's talk about the fact that we feel good about this decision for a
Yeah.
minute. But we
Yeah.
don't. We just move on because tomorrow's the next decision.
Right. Right. Yeah. How true. And, when you said decision regret, when we let the Fabry community know that we were doing this podcast, we kind of asked if there's any questions from the community that they would want, or some of the things that they feel that are those heavy real life decisions. So one of our community members actually called in, and we'll listen to his question now.
Hi, Jennifer. I've been in conversation with my Fabry team. We'll join a clinical trial, and I'm having a really difficult time making the decision because I fear making the wrong one. What steps can I take to bring me closer to a decision?
Clinical trial decision making is hard because, let's face it, it's uncharted territory. And that's why it's called a trial, right? So that doesn't make the decision any easier. But I also want to acknowledge that one of the things that also makes clinical trials hard, not only that it's an unknown, right? So let's just, we had that finger with uncertainty at the beginning of this conversation. But also that regret and the fear of regret can be really paralyzing. As I said, we can have anticipatory regret. But I want to start with a simple truth, and this is true of any decision, and particularly one I think we have to remind ourselves about with regards to the clinical trial experiences, that some regret is almost always inevitable with every decision. None of us gets it right the first time or every time necessarily, is what I really mean to say. And the important thing to do is to remember that you are making the best decision you can at this moment with the information you have. I think in clinical trials, the information you have part is the part that we need to focus on for this particular answer, because that will help you get closer to making a decision, and hopefully one for which you will have the least amount of regret, right? So what can you do to do that? Like, how can you come to that? One of the things that I think is important, and again, I think we don't talk about this in the decision-making process, is to think about what kind of decision maker you are.
Okay.
Now, I've already said to you, it's really valuable to go back to look at what decisions you made that you felt good about, and ones that you felt maybe less happy with, and think about the process you went through. Now I want you to think a little bit about what kind of decision maker you are, what kind of style you have. A lot of people aren't even aware that we each have our own decision-making style. So some people are planners. They want to study and know all of their options before they make a choice. My husband is a planner. We lived an entire year without kitchen chairs because he felt like he needed to look at and sit on every single one before he did it. So are you the person that's considering a clinical trial and needs to understand all of the other therapies that are already out there or might potentially be coming down the pathway? Are you a planner? You need all your options before you can actually come to a decision you feel good about? Maybe you are. Some people are seekers, and seekers tend to rarely make a decision without consulting other people. And they don't always consult it about the informational things the way the planner is doing.
Mhm.
They may be consulting about the emotional things to say, what did you weigh when you were making this decision? How did you feel after you made this decision? I tend to be a seeker. If I'm going to book an Airbnb, and I know that's nowhere relevant to a clinical trial, but I usually read the reviews before I book it. That's the thing I value the most, is the reviews over the description and the pictures. So I might need to talk to other people who have participated in a clinical trial. And maybe it can't be the one you're considering because I don't know what stage it's at, but maybe I need to talk to somebody who similarly has made this decision to understand how they went through it. The third sort of major way that a person makes a decision, there are some people who are intuitive decision makers. Usually those are the people that we look at and go, why can't I be more like that? The decision seems so easy to make for them because they always seem to have a gut sense to do. So they're probably not usually the person that's coming away struggling with a decision. But it's good to know that and to think about that. And in what circumstances are you that kind of decision maker? In the clinical trial process, I think knowing that is particularly important because it may not be the right person that's sitting across the table from you that's explaining what your actual choices are. Because how we make a decision is influenced by how we receive the information that we need in order to make that decision. So, for example, if you're a planner and you're only talking to one physician and he's only telling you about one option, are you going to feel confident about that decision? Probably not as highly likely. You needed somebody who was going to go through all those different options with you. So, for example, a principal investigator may not be the person that you can lean on because
Right.
they're mostly speaking about the trial that they're concerned with. You may need to speak to other people. And so the person sitting across from you and how they deliver the information can influence how you receive it and how you make a decision. So looking at that and what you've done in the past and think about hey, that doctor that really helped me make that decision, how did they give me the information? Now to decide about this clinical trial, I've got to go find that person. Again, because I know people love to hear something practical, but we all make pro-con lists, right?
Mhm.
And this is probably a space trying to decide about a clinical trial where a pro-con list can be really helpful. But you know what happens, Julia, a lot of times when we make a pro-con list, we look for the people that are going to talk about the cons with us, and less so for the people that are going to talk about the pros with us, the things that are on the pro side of the column. And what we really need are both of those
Mhm.
in order to weigh a decision appropriately. Because again, I'll go back to that helps us feel like the decision has been shared. And when we share in our decision making, we often have the capacity to feel less regret at the end.
Why is it that we tend to find people across from us that's going to speak to the cons? Do you think?
I don't really know. And I just think that that's how my experience is. I think it's because we want somebody to talk us out of it.
Yeah.
And we want to hear how could that con become a pro?
Mhm. Right. Yeah.
And there's so many, and sometimes that happens. Maybe the con on your list is, I don't want to travel to get to this clinical trial. It's too disruptive to my life. And maybe they can offer you some solutions that would make that a more viable alternative for you. So sometimes that's necessary, but also looking at the pros, because sometimes it's the pros that reveal the emotions that are attached to
Mhm.
what we're doing with this. And again, we make those decisions in two places. And so to come out feeling confident, we have to have listened to both. And we need champions or people that are actually doing that with us.
As you're saying this, I'm thinking, when I'm thinking about that con list, I can think that is easier to find someone to help you talk your way out of it because you're scared. I'm thinking about some of the, the real life things that happen for Fabry patients, like deciding with their partner if they would like to have children and potentially pass Fabry down. Deciding to even listen, acknowledge that they have new symptoms, talking with your physician about starting on pain management medication, getting a pacemaker, an ICD, getting your children tested for Fabry, and so many more of these hard decisions. I think that they're tough because they're scary. So I can see now with what you've been saying, how all of these things that we put into the decisions is so important, and listening to both your head and your heart. But like you said, I think it's important to find the right person that can talk to you about this and get across the table from.
Yeah. And also, as much as, a shared decision can feel really good, sharing in a decision is actually really hard. And many of the things that you just talked about aren't decisions that you can make singularly.
No.
They require the input of someone else. So, if you're talking about deciding to have children, right, and the potential of passing down a disease, now you're talking about two people's decision-making process, you and your partner, two people's emotional responses to the decision-making process. And maybe, like I just said to you, my husband's a planner and I'm a seeker.
Right.
And so that can complicate a decision-making process. So, we look for people who can share and help us build our confidence in our decisions by sharing it. The process of sharing is actually very hard itself. And it can't be removed from the decision-making process and can contribute to our sense of fatigue. So, all of those things, deciding about pain management medication, those decisions aren't solely necessarily up to you. You have to involve a physician, right?
Absolutely.
And then you probably have some family components that may need to be considered in the decision. And you have to layer in everybody's emotions that are attached to it. And it's not always the physician whose emotions you're layering in, but in your own household, you have to think about those things. And I think that's why oftentimes we come away feeling overwhelmed. And that overwhelm can lead us to avoidance and not wanting to make a decision.
And when you said not being able or not wanting to make a decision, that's indecision. Is that right? So, and that also has its own, significant consequences if you're just going to stay in that indecision, in that place of indecision. So, I guess it's the same question that I think you touched on, but it's how do you get from that point of indecision to the next point where you can make the next best, the next best move?
Yeah. I mean, again, I want to remind people again, because this bears repeating, is as human beings, we make the best decisions we can with the information that we have in the moment. And it's important when you feel yourself getting in that place of indecision or avoidance that you remind yourself of that. You know what I mean? Like accept it as a mantra in a certain kind of way. I also think that one of the things that we can do is, again, that breaking down of past decisions, really important. Assigning the emotions to it helps us get away from our feelings of overwhelm, which lead to then an inability to make a decision. And also go back to that. I used that image earlier of the gremlin sort of sitting on your back. Often one indecision builds towards a greater indecision, which builds towards another one. And suddenly this little tiny gremlin that was this big at the beginning, or this decision that was this big at the beginning, has actually become huge. And that doesn't feel good. And so it makes the decision-making process really, really hard. And that's why when I talk to parents, or families about decision making, I try to encourage being intentional about thinking about what your decision process is, really, really dissecting it and understanding it and being able to discuss it with the people around you, because your clinician needs to know if you're a planner, or they need to know if you're a seeker. They need to understand who you are so they can best serve you. And also it can empower you to say, hey, I'm a planner, but you're just giving me one choice right now. You're telling me what you think I should do. I need somebody that's going to go through all the choices. I need to find a different doctor. It can give you an empowerment to say, hey, this process isn't working for me.
Yeah.
Let me get out from this person helping me. And then listening to your heart, like, don't slough it aside. And we do have a tendency, I think, particularly when we're forced to make the quantity of decisions that we have to make in the rare experience, we have a tendency to make them in our heads and avoid the feelings that are associated with them in our hearts. And both need the weight, especially when we get to critical big decisions. And you have to build that muscle. Like you can't just go to the big decision and say, hey, now it's time for me to listen to my heart. You have to strengthen the muscle to do that with some of the little ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is very true. And it sounds like there's an undertone of awareness. It's kind of just really trying to dig a little bit deeper and just ask yourself some of these questions that you brought up today. What are the answers to those questions? And, what kind of decision maker are you? And how to move forward with that. I think that is very empowering.
Yeah. And to look at how the people around you are making a decision, even watching your children grow into their experience and talking with them about carrier status, or their status as a patient, it can actually be helpful to see what kind of decision maker they are. That's going to help you as a parent them into helping them know what they want to do for themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and I think it's about finding the right people around you to then help you figure out what that, to help you listen to your head and your heart.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all that you have with us today and your own story too. I love all the work that you are doing, and you're making us feel more empowered and supported with our decisions. Before we step off though, is there any final words that you have for the patients listening today?
Yeah, so I'd like to just say that on courageousparentsnetwork.org, you can find a guide on decision making. You can also find a helpful little infographic about what to do when the physician across from you might not be delivering the information in the way that you need it, and how to talk to them about that.
Great.
And you can listen to how other people have made decisions in the videos that we have. And most of the materials on Courageous Parents Network are for caregivers or parents considering, their medical condition in their child. A lot of them are relevant to what is going on, and you should lean on those things and look towards them. So do try to check out the website, particularly go to the guide section and look at guides. We have a whole unit understanding the clinical trial experience, and its focus is focusing on the emotional components of things like, when you hear inclusion criteria, do you emotionally experience, what is it that the emotion that you're experiencing? A lot of times it's exclusion because you might not meet the criteria. So we talk about those things. So there are resources that I think you'll find helpful to help you, as you said, Julia, earlier, be intentional about educating yourself to how you make decisions.
Wonderful. Yeah, please do check those out. Courageous Parent Network, CPN, is also on Instagram, Facebook as well. And there's a lot of great resources there. We started with one of Jennifer's favorite quotes, "We must always travel in hope." And I'd like to end with one of my favorites, which is by Lauren Martin. And it's, "Bravery does not mean fearless. When you're scared to do something, but do it anyway, that is the true meaning of being brave." So with some of these tough decisions that we are making, you don't have to be fearless. just brave enough to make one step in the direction that you want to go.